Okay, folks, we still have a lot to cover on Chapter 31. We need to discuss abstraction and sculpture, which is going to follow the post-painterly abstraction style. It's not really going to be similar to the abstract expressionism. It's going to be more similar to the post-painterly abstraction. We're going to look at Judd in regards to that. We need to talk about pop art. We also need to talk about super realism, also known as photorealism, and feminist art, as well as environmental, site-specific, performance art, and conceptual art. So obviously a lot is going on between 1945 and 1980. All right, so let's get back into it. We're going to start with our next figure with the abstraction in sculpture, and we're going to look at, in particular, Judd, not Rudd. Figure 3119, titled Untitled. And again, abstraction and sculpture at this time is going to reflect post-painterly concepts. And if you remember, with post-painterly concepts, their look was cool, rational, and tighter pictorial control. So it's going to be the same concepts, but three-dimensionally. So they're going to focus on simple 3D mass and shape, and they're going to really embrace what's called minimalism. Minimalism. M-I-N-I-M-A-L-I-S-M. Minimalism. And that is, again, just reflecting mass and shape in a very simple way, not too loose, not too chaotic, and it's going to be very crisp and very simple and very rational and super tight. Okay, so you can kind of see that with figure 3119, Untitled. And what Judd wanted to do is he wanted to create any kind of ambiguity or deception that might rise from some sculpture or even the paintings, like with abstract expressionism. Any of that ambiguity or uncertainty or any element of deception, he wants it completely gone. He wants to completely remove it. He doesn't want there to be any uncertainty, any deception, any ambiguity. Pretty much what you see is what you got, which is what we talked about with Stella in post-painterly abstraction with his Más o menos piece, more or less. It's all about what you see is what you're going to get. And the same concept applies here with Judd's Untitled. And if you think about it, why would they want that? It's because they're coming out of a time of complete uncertainty, questioning, ambiguity, deception with the wars that had occurred globally with World War II, and they're looking for rational, logical, give it to me as it is, don't deceive me, don't lie to me, just give me the truth. So the artwork for the post-painterly abstractionist is going to be much about what the objects are. They are just truthfully what they are. There's nothing deceptive about it. And how Judd is going to work on that is making everything very precise and very simple. Like each little rectilinear box that's oriented here with Untitled is very precise and very simple. And he goes on, based off of the material as well, and a couple other elements. One is it's basic geometry, and it's built out of brass and plexiglass. Now, the reason he used the plexiglass is so that not to... Hold on. Oh yeah, the reason he used the plexiglass is to create a transparency, right? Which is what truth is supposed to be about, is a level of transparency without any obscurity, no translucency, there's no milkiness to it. You can see right through it, okay? So that's why he used this plexiglass, and it's pink, reddish pink in hue. And the reason why he's using that plexiglass is, again, that transparency, but it's also making the sculpture open and closed at the same time, which is a new concept. Typically, up to this point, either the figure or the sculpture is open, meaning its arms are way out, like we saw with Giacometti, man pointing. That's an open sculpture. Versus a closed sculpture, you're bound down almost like a boulder, and there's really not much that you can do to really expose the openness of the sculpture. It's very closed, and it would take like a crowbar, metaphorically, to open and pry those arms open. But here, it's open and closed, and it's truth on both ends, if you will. All right, so it's closed because they're little rectilinear boxes, but they're open because of the transparency in the plexiglass. You can see the inside of the brass work, which is the perimeter of each individual piece. So it's open and closed. So that is truth. There's no ambiguity and there's no deception. It's both open and closed. And he didn't want to disguise anything with paint or any other materials. He wanted it to be reflective. He wanted it to be transparent. That led to what's called an objecthood. 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 And that objecthood is that, again, it is just about the object. It is not about a metaphor. It is not about symbolism. It is just simply about the object. As truthful as an object can get. Revealed and exposed, being open with the transparency of the plexiglass, and then closed with the perimeter of the brass that's built around to make the overall rectilinear shape. Okay? So objecthood. It's all just about the object. And if you look back at Stella's más o menos, it's all about just the grid, the modular grid in which those lines and grounds were zigzagging across. Right? It was all about just the placement of lines and grounds, lines and planes. Nothing else. No symbolism, no metaphors. What you see is what you got. Truth, which is what people were searching for after these great wars. All right, so that's abstraction and sculpture. Now, let's take it even a little further into artists that are trying to make work that everyday people can possibly relate to. And the first is we're going to look at is figure 3125, Rauschenberg, Canyon. And this is going to be the first piece that we're going to look at in the pop art section, P-O-P-A-R-P. We're going to talk about Rauschenberg, we're going to talk about Warhol, Andy Warhol, and we're going to talk about Klaus Oldenburg. Okay, so Rauschenberg is the first. Now, with pop art, the plan, and this is what they wanted, is they felt that the abstract expressionist, the post-painterly abstractionist, and the minimalist, all right, like what we saw just now with Judd's piece, they all those different movements alienated the public, the overall public, you and me. It was so cerebral, it was so stylized and developed in a way that kind of excluded the everyday middle class to working class people. So the pop artists wanted to change that. That's why it's called pop. It's popular. They wanted to make it popular for everybody. They wanted everybody to be excited about it. Just like we talk about pop music that's on the radio. It's something in there each person can somehow relate to. One of the songs, a lyric in the song, a rhythm in the song, a beat in the song. That's why it's called pop music. This is pop art. And it's meant to communicate the power of art to a wider audience. Not just your upper, gallery directors, big collectors, museum owners, and huge movers and commissioners of the arts. It's about everyday folks, working class, middle class, becoming at least aware of and be able to communicate the power of art. Just like this class, the point is at the end of this session that you'll be able to communicate the powerful range of art from the Renaissance all the way up to today. And the pop artists were the first to do this. And they would use certain elements that everybody could relate to, incorporated it into their artwork. They used advertising techniques like printing, mass printing, like the newspaper, right? Mass printing. They use comic books and they use movies and movie strips. And they would combine all of these things into their artwork to make it relatable, to make everyday person like you and me be able to go, oh yeah, I can relate at least to that part of the piece, and then try to figure out how what you know in that piece relates to everything else that's in the piece. And that's what Rauschenberg's doing here with Canyon in 1959, figure 3125. So what he's doing is he's using mass media, in images in mass media within his work. He's using newspapers, he's using magazine prints, and he's combining them all. And by combining all of these mass media elements with other sculptural elements, which we'll talk about, like with the taxidermy bird, it creates a new type of artwork, and it's called combines. That's Combines, combines. And it's Rauschenberg's work that drums up this label called combines. And all it is, it's a combination, or a combine, right? A combination of paintings and sculptures and other printed elements that have been painted upon. So that's what he's done. He's used magazines, newspapers, and passages, like from pamphlets, with his sculptures. And what he did with the magazines, newspapers, and passages is he actually did an abstract expressionistic style of painting on the top of them. He would reorient it. So if it wasn't just a newspaper faced and put and glued right on to a wooden background or cardboard, it's on a cardboard box, by the way, but it's been twisted, put to the side, and then put onto the cardboard box so that it has some level of thoughtful orientation and refabrication. Very much like what the synthetic cubists would do, is they would cut out their own paintings and objects and paintings and drawings, and then they would collage them together. Here, they're taking out mass media material like magazines, newspapers, cutting them out, rearranging them, and then coming in and painting over the top of them to kind of obscure it a little bit. But an everyday person like you and me can go in and be like, oh, that was a news article from a couple months ago, right? And it's now on this piece of artwork, and it's oriented with these other things. I wonder how it all relates. I wonder how it all is combined together. So that was the purpose of what the pop artists wanted to do, is again communicate power of art to a wider audience. So use abstract expressionist styles, and you should know that that will be very loose, very energetic, and kind of free-flowing movement of paint. All right, that's what the abstract expressionists did. And he also used a new technique in printmaking called silk screening, which we'll talk about here with Warhol in particular. And silk screening was a way to make a really quick image transfer of something through the silk screen onto a piece of paper or onto canvas, or onto cardboard, which is what Rauschenberg was doing here with Canyon. And so he would combine the prints of the silk screening technique. I don't know if any of you have ever had a t-shirt that's been silk screened. It's the same technique. You have an image, you have to apply it onto a screen that will be the reverse of what the image is supposed to look like. So if you want the eyes of your image, of your figurative image on your shirt to be on the left, that means on the screen they have to be on the right, and then you squeegee the ink, the fabric ink, so that it doesn't fade out whenever you put it through the washer and dryer. You squeegee the fabric ink through with the t-shirt underneath, and then you lift up the screen, and that image will be the inverse and be in the proper orientation on the t-shirt. Same concept applied here with Rauschenberg on the cardboard. And that roughly applied pigments, again, that's the abstract expressionism painting style that he's using there. Yeah, and there's also been a discussion about how some of his work is very Dada-esque, as you can see with the bird and then the pillow that's tied to the string. But with the Dadaists, which were prior to the Surrealist, it was more about obscuring all of the different components and images for it not to make any sense at all. Here, you can at least, even though the overall composition may not make sense, except if you read into the idea of the canyon, and it's almost as if this bird is flying over this canyon with all this information flying behind it. At least you can pick out the individual aspects and kind of look at them individually, which makes him not a Dadaist at all. Okay, so now let's look at Warhol, Andy Warhol, and that's going to be figure 3127. Now with Andy Warhol, he was a commercialist and an advertiser first. So he started in the commercial district, and then mass producing images for commercial needs. And he was an advertiser. Okay, so he was out there advertising on behalf of companies. So that's where he got his start. And that's what leads into green Coca-Cola bottle, which we have here in figure 3127. And what it's about mass consumer culture. All right? So making these relatable and recognizable objects for, again, the overall wider audience of how many people were actually drinking Coca-Cola, from the hard working class labor in the fields all the way up to individuals in a CEO's office. Making objects and using objects to make it relatable across the whole entire field, and that's what Warhol was all about. But he wanted to use familiar objects and people as well. Like you'll see with figure 3127A, it's Marilyn Monroe, all right, and it's called the Marilyn diptych. And he wanted to either use familiar objects or familiar people so that people can relate to them. Again, it's all about not making the public feel alienated, and that's why pop culture was so popular, because everybody could relate to the objects to some capacity. So familiar objects and people were used. He used visual vocabulary and a method of printing to reinforce mass consumer culture. So at this time in the 60s and the late 50s, there was a lot of money coming into the United States, and there was a huge level of consumerism. Buying big refrigerators, bigger houses, multiple cars, the television, filling your refrigerator and your freezer with Coca-Cola. All of this plentifulness, all of this surplus was available. And Warhol wanted to show that, and use those images to reflect what was going on in this mass consumer culture. So we see the use of the image like the Coca-Cola bottle and Marilyn Monroe for those purposes. And then he would use the technique of printmaking because it was a very quick manufactured process where he would run an image of the Coca-Cola, rearrange the image a little bit on the silk screen, and then run it, and then make multiples and multiples like you're in a manufacturing company. So he would use printmaking with silk screening to create this endless printing, but slightly with each one it was a little bit different. And the Coke bottle is saturated in the American society, and that's why he increased the number of the images that you see here on this print. Okay, this is 6 foot by almost 5 feet, so there's a lot of Coke bottles here. I'll be right back. So the process that he's using is meant to reflect, again, the consumeristic aspects that were being developed at this time during the late 50s and into the 60s. And that's why we see all of these Coke bottles, and that's why you see so many Marilyn Monroes in 3127A. Again, everybody relates to Marilyn Monroe a little differently, and the images are supposed to be slightly skewed based off of kind of the historical popular element of her figure in society at that time. So let's go on and finish this video with a pop art sculpture, and we're going to look at 3129, and this is Oldenburg. And again, Oldenburg, like Warhol and like Rauschenberg, wanted to create these commercial objects. Again, something relatable. And you can see here with lipstick and caterpillar tracks, it's a combination of caterpillar tracks on the bottom of a tank as well as that of a tube of lipstick. So, either it could be, the female relating to the lipstick and the male relating to the tractor treads, or vice versa, or the tank treads, or vice versa. So he originally created this piece out of stuffed or inflatable material. So the lipstick was actually supposed to be inflatable, and then the bottom was made out of plywood, and it was meant to be a socio-political piece where you could stand on this platform and speak out about, let's say, the onset of the Vietnam conflict, which was happening at that time, and it was a platform to be able to speak out against war. Coming out of a time when there was World War II, and now we're several decades after that, and being able to give any individual a voice to be able to speak out against the atrocities of war and the brutality of war, which we just saw a whole bunch of artwork reflecting the difficulty in that. And that's what this piece was about. And it originally was designed where the lipstick would inflate as the speaker was speaking on the platform to kind of give it this performance element. So that was the original, but it got destroyed, and so it was rebuilt here out of painted steel, alumina, and fiberglass, and it's permanently there at Yale University for anybody who wants to speak out to speak on top of this platform. But again, using objects of familiarity, recognizable objects, so that it communicates throughout a wider audience. It's not about trying to isolate or alienate anybody. It's about everybody being somewhat compatible to the overall composition of the objects. It is, again, anti-war placement, so it has a political element to it. It does have a phallic and militaristic element to it, which again is kind of a jab at the idea of having to constantly go into war. And again, it was originally inflatable with the plywood, but it was destroyed, remade. And he, Klaus Oldenburg, he never saw it as actually a work of art. It was labeled a work of art, but he saw it as more of a political statement and less about a piece of artwork. All right. So again, speaking on behalf of the voices of the many. So not being a work of art that sets itself aside in this alienated museum or this alienated gallery where only a certain privileged people can see it. It's placed on the grounds at a university where anybody can go and visit those grounds and see this piece of artwork and relate to it. So again, that's what pop art was about. Was not alienating the public, but keeping it very simple, based off of very recognizable images, so that everybody can communicate the power of art. Okay, we'll leave it at that, and then we'll talk about superrealism, feminist art, environmental, performance, and conceptual in the next video.